So, hello everyone, welcome to Sunya IIS. Now, this is your ongoing worksheet discussion for Prelims Crash Course 2023. Now, in the ongoing series, this is regarding your chapter number 3, lecture number 3. And the topic for today's discussion or questionnaire is British structural and government policies along with the socio-cultural regulations which were brought in the 19th century. Okay. We will be discussing about this 19th century thing in the sense that Britishers started coming with their own set of rules and regulations from 18th century, 1765 onwards, and in the 18th as plus the 19th century, the Indian Renaissance also took place. So the Indian Renaissance means the so-called Bhadra Log in Bengal and the then recently educated intelligentsia which evolved in Deccan and Madras too. All these people started taking initiative for the societal evolution on the Western lines. So what really happened regarding that we will be discussing today. Let's start the lecture or discussion. Question number 1, which was regarding the Regulating Act of 1773. Now, before the question, let me tell you one thing, that there are two set of regulations. A set of regulations were between the one which were framed by the British Parliament to regulate the East India Company's actions in India. Another set of rules and regulations were framed by the East India Company to regulate their working in India, how to structure Indian government. So these are two set of to regulate Indian government. So these are two set of regulations. We'll be talking about them one by one. So the first one is Regulating Act of 1773. It was the first attempt of British Parliament to regulate East India Company. The main reason was to revamp the financial situation of East India Company. The mishandling of the Great Famine of Bengal of 1770 forced the British Parliament to act. Which of these are correct? Now we have discussed extensively that the Regulating Act was brought in with the intention to regulate the East India Company's working. The mishandling of Great Bengal Famine played a vital role. It was heavily reported even in the English press of the time. And so the British East India Company was in huge pressure, as well as the British East India Company was not paying the £400,000 which they had assured the British government to be paying. So in that condition, the company was in a debt situation and was on the verge on bankruptcy. And so they asked for a loan from the government, and government, with the permission of Parliament, when gave the loan, also came certain set of regulations to make sure that the financial irregularities will be handled, and also something like the Great Famine don't obviously comes to limelight. It happened again, but they just wanted to make sure that this doesn't comes to limelight. So all three of them are correct in this question. Okay, let's move to the next question. Consider the following statement about the Charter Acts. Charter Act actually started coming right from year 1600 itself. Always remember, Charter Act started coming from 1600 itself. On December 31st, year 1600, Queen Elizabeth I gave the first charter in favor of East India Company, when back then it was called as Merchant Adventurers. And they were continuously getting charter one after another. After Elizabeth I, James I, although reduced the immemorial time period of charter and started renewing it after every 20 years, and in that lead only. But the Charter Act which we are going to refer to is something which started coming after 1793 onwards, and from 1793 till 1853 all the Charter Acts are important for UPSC examination. Now why not prior to 1793? Because it's till 1793 the British East India Company didn't really face much of an opposition from other English traders, and it was only in the aftermath of French Revolution of 1789, when the British other traders found it difficult to trade in India, that they asked the British government to open the Indian market, and then the struggle started. And from there onwards, 1793 Charter Act onward, the things became interesting and it became useful for us to study. The Charter Act of 1793 was the first ever charter in favor of East India Company by British Parliament. So this is wrong, as we have just discussed now. The Charter Act of 1813 recommended the propagation of Western philosophy in India. This is straightforward correct. It was the starting of the 19th century. The very first decade, the Britishers, the civil servants who came in, usually only in Bengal, they started propagating the first light of the Western philosophy in India. And subsequently, the Bhadralok, the newly formed intelligentsia, okay, in Bengal and subsequently in Deccan, also perturbed by it, started building on that idea. So this statement is also correct. This is also the Charter Act where it was decided that 1 lakh rupee annually will be spent by the East India Company for propagation of Western philosophy and science in India, or Indian population, natives actually the word was. The Charter Act of 1853 reorganized all the East India Company territories into a single entity called British India. This is wrong. It happened in 1833. The Charter Act of 1833 is something which organized properly the territories of East India Company, and for the very first time, British Indian territories, the word was used. Okay. So third statement is wrong. First and second are correct. B option. Consider the following statement about the British administration in India. Warren Hastings established the district for the first time. This statement is right. Hastings came in 1772 itself, although Charter Act came in 1773. But it ended up in Hastings' hand to divide the territory which the Britishers got from Bengal in Bengal in 1795 onward into form of proper districts. So it was him who formed the district for the first time. Although the civil service was in great detail was properly established by Cornwallis. So students always get confused and think that districts for the first time were also established by Cornwallis. It is not. The office of Superintendent of Police was established by Cornwallis, not the districts. The permanent settlement was brought officially by Cornwallis through the regulation number 1 to 4 of the Cornwallis Code. Always remember, the Cornwallis Code came in 1793 again. Okay, Cornwallis Code came in 1793 and it had 48 regulations. These Cornwallis Code were used to regulate relations between East India Company and Indian native subjects till the Government of India Act 1858. Okay, so and through this, the very 4 regulations were about the permanent settlement. So this statement is right. Okay, Bombay and Madras were subservient to Calcutta from early part of 18th century. Now, early part of 18th century is basically something like 1700 plus to 1750, isn't it? Now, understand this thing that at this time, Bombay and Madras always tried to report directly to London, and it was only after it was established in the Regulating Act of 1773 that Bombay and Madras have to report to Bengal. Although still they continued to foster their own decision, and you will see again in 1784 through Pitt's India Act, William Pitt the Younger, the newly formed government and his Prime Minister William Pitt the Younger again mentioned that Bombay and Madras certainly have to report to the Governor General in Fort William sitting in Bengal. Okay, so these things happen in later part of 18th century, not the early part. So the third statement is wrong. 1 and 2 are correct. Fine, so B option. Consider the following about 19th century British judiciary in India. Cases involving Europeans were presided over by the white judges only. William Bentinck ended the system of circuit courts. The first law commission recommended IPC and CRPC. Now, in the 19th century, that means the period between 1800 to 1900. Okay, we know very well that Ilbert Bill crisis came in, and after that the Ilbert Bill was introduced, but in a more dissolved manner. Now, a dissolved manner also allowed the Indian judges to sit, but with this only exception that the Europeans will get to choose, okay, that whether they want Indian judges to preside over their cases or not. So cases involving Europeans were presided over by white judges only is wrong, although the Britishers were allowed to decide that what they actually want to happen. So for example, you'll see in 1917 when even Annie Besant was arrested, since she was a citizen of Britain, even though she was living in India, she was given this option that whether she wants a white judge to hear her case or she is fine with the Indian judge. Okay, so keep this thing very much in mind. These are minute details. This can get your point deducted. So the first statement is wrong, although it sounds very much to be true. William Bentinck ended the system of circuit court in 1831. Okay. The first law commission recommended IPC and CRPC. This statement is right. Okay, it was basically Thomas Macaulay, who in 1834-35 only came up with IPC and subsequently with CRPC. Although these were not implemented immediately, it was implemented only in the aftermath of the First War of Independence, that is the revolt of 1857. They were implemented in 1860s onwards. Okay, so only the third statement is right. C option. Consider the following about the British education system in India. Anglicist versus Orientalist debate ended with the mediation of Thomas Macaulay. Downward filtration theory was implemented as per the recommendation of Charter Act of 1813. Raleigh Commission recommended that more scholarship should be given to the native students. Now, Anglicist versus Orientalist debate actually ended with mediation of Thomas Macaulay in the favor of Anglicists. So Thomas Macaulay was someone who came with the very idea that downward filtration theory should be applied, and some only few who could be helpful in running the government in India should be taught the English language. And over the period, not only they will act as the foundational pillar among the natives for the British government, but also will go on to teach rest of the Indians also the language of the British. So also that was a failure in its own self. Downward filtration theory. Anglicist versus Orientalist debate ended initially with the Anglicist getting over the hyper hand. 1835 onwards, the Anglicist rule was implemented. That is, all the education was given only in English language. But subsequently, as per the Charles Wood's dispatch, this debate also ended on a better note, in which it was decided that the primary education will be given in the native tongue, and the secondary education or post-primary education will be given in English language, or English language will be given only for those students who will be preferably going to the higher education for the university purposes or college purposes. Okay, so downward filtration theory was implemented as per the recommendation of Charter Act. No, Thomas Macaulay was someone who came with this idea in 1835. Okay, the second statement is also wrong. Raleigh Commission recommended that more scholarship should be given to the native student. Now, Raleigh Commission is something which was established by Lord Curzon in 1902. His intention was to get such a recommendation so that he can reduce the scholarship, and through the reduction in scholarship, reduce the impact of nationalism in Bengal. As Bengal was called in those times as the cradle of nationalism, that is what he wanted to stop or reduce its impact. So you will see, based on this Raleigh Commission recommendation, then he went on to pass the Universities Act of 1904, which also played a vital role in the support of the students for the Swadeshi and boycott movement. Okay, because the terms were so harsh and they actually reduced the scholarship. So this statement that Raleigh Commission recommended to increase the scholarship is wrong. Okay, so Anglicist versus Orientalist debate led to the end with the mediation of Thomas Macaulay. That statement is right. Rest of them are wrong. Fine. Regarding the British involvement in native affairs, British officials in India were influenced by the fast evolving European culture. Between 1813 and 1857, British officials took keen interest in the social and cultural issues of India. Post 1857, British followed the policy of cultural decimation against the natives. To answer this question correctly, I will suggest that you please read your old NCERT, the Bipin Chandra's chapter. It will be very helpful for you. Otherwise, look, in these questions also, there are no specific terminology, no specific factual information is asked. Whether you have the basic understanding of the whole issue is basically needed to be known here. Okay, that's the whole plan. Now, regarding British involvement in native affairs, British officials in India were influenced by the fast evolving European culture. Yeah, so surely in the first decade of the 19th century, the newly appointed British officials were getting influence from the evolving European culture, which was talking about the ideas like French Revolution. So liberty, equality, fraternity. Okay, these ideas were actually brought by the British officials in the first few years in the first decade of 19th century. Between 1830 and 1857, British officials took keen interest in social and cultural issues in India. That is also true. You will see that for in the initial phases, whether it was Ram Mohan Roy or Vidyasagar, or even in the Deccan, you will see Phule couple. They were able to run or do work on the social reform level because of the support of the English officials. Even the school which Phule couple opened was running with the funds which were given by the English officials. And they went on to stop this funding after the revolt of 1857, when they realized that there are things which the Britishers are doing with the intention that they are doing something good for Indians, but Indians don't consider it to be helpful. So the second statement is right. The third statement, post 1857, British followed the policy of cultural decimation against the natives. Okay. Now, this statement is also very interesting. British followed the policy of cultural decimation against the native. Now, this is something which is wrong, because after post 1857, usually the idea is that cultural decimation was done by Britishers, but no. Official idea was that Britishers decided to maintain a neutral stance when it come to cultural or any other native related policies. So whether they were doing cultural decimation, no, officially no. This is true. You will see that by 1880s, a lot of British officials started doing a lot of things which were not considered acceptable by Indian culture, but that was more oriented because of their racist behavior against all the Indians and the Africans, and from that context. It was not with the intention of just cultural decimation as a minted policy. Over there, post 1857, Britishers were of the opinion that we don't have to get involved with the personal affairs of the natives, as per the recommendation of the Max Muller's commission also. Okay, so you will see that the first and the second statement is correct and the third one is wrong. Consider the following statement. British Parliament gave a decade to end slavery in India after the ending slavery itself. Decrease in demand of indentured laborers was the immediate outcome of the end of slavery. In Indian Penal Code, or at the time Indian Penal Code 1861, criminalized enslavement as criminal offence. Which of them are correct? Now, the first statement, look, in 1830, a new government came into power in Britain, and that was a Whig government which came into power for the first time. They were much more on the liberal side. Okay, and therefore you will see they will bring in the much needed the great parliamentary reforms of Britain in 1832, through which they enlarged the electorate, the number of people who were allowed to participate in the electoral process. And 1833, they also made slavery illegal. They then went to give one more decade to rest of the English or British colonies to end slavery. And so subsequently in 1843, slavery ended in India too. But end of slavery doesn't mean that the demand for cheap labor will end. And therefore from there came the demand of indentured laborers, which in Indian case were called as Girmitiya Mazdoor, from the word agreement. Because the Indian people were unable to pronounce the word agreement, they used to pronounce it Girment, and so came the Girmitiya Mazdoor. So British Parliament gave a decade to end slavery in India after its ending slavery itself. This statement is right. Decrease in demand of indentured labor was the immediate outcome of end of slavery. This statement is wrong. It was increase in demand of indentured labor was the immediate outcome of end of slavery. And the third statement, IPC 1861, criminalized enslavement as criminal offense. This statement is right. Okay, so the first, and officially they made it illegal through IPC. So the second statement is wrong, and the third statement is right. So 1 and 3, the D option is the correct one. Now, consider the following statement. Widow Remarriage Act was passed by Lord William Bentinck. Ishwar Chand Vidyasagar played a vital role in its passing. And Ishwar Chand Vidyasagar wrote Bidhwa Bibah, which of them are correct? That's the question. So Widow Remarriage Act was passed by William Bentinck. This statement is wrong. Widow Remarriage Act was passed in 1856. Lord Dalhousie was the Governor General at the time. William Bentinck was the Governor General in 1829 when the Sati Pratha Abolition Act was passed. So first statement is wrong. Ishwar Chand Vidyasagar played a very vital role in the passing of the Widow Remarriage Act. This statement is right. It was his continuous writing which in a way is considered that influenced Dalhousie, and Dalhousie cited the writings of Ishwar Vidyasagar when he was going to pass the Widow Remarriage Act. Okay, so the second statement is right. Even the first marriage after the passing of Widow Remarriage Act was took place with the steps which were the support of Ishwar Chand Vidyasagar only. And Ishwar Chand Vidyasagar wrote Bidhva Viva. That's a book on widow remarriage. Okay, Bidhva Viva. So that is also true. So C statement is correct. 1 is wrong. Okay, now that is actually all for discussion on this topic. I hope if you have attended already the online lecture, it will be very helpful if you go through these questions. If you haven't yet, please make sure that you go through Sunya IAS official website, or you can contact on the given phone number. Approach the team, get in touch, start your preparation as soon as possible, and get benefited for the crash course and before you appear in the Prelims 2023. That will be all from my side. Let's catch up in the discussion of lecture number 4 next time. Thank you.